50% turnout.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our extended election coverage here on WWL-TV Plus, our app, our website, and of course our social media pages tonight. The polls here in Louisiana closed just moments ago, and we are of course anxiously awaiting those results to start coming in. And I'm here with Eyewitness News political analyst Clancy Dubas and pollster Ron Fauché to give us their expert analysis as we move through the night tonight. We have a lot to get to, but we want to begin by just talking about the races, the key races that we're really going to be keeping a close eye on. So let's just go through those real quick. First, of course, we're talking about the U.S. Senate. That is a big question mark for the country, and it's a question mark here in Louisiana, too.
Not really much of a question mark in Louisiana. It's really a question of the margin, not so much the outcome. Would you say, Ron?
Yeah, I think so. Senator Kennedy is expected to win pretty easily. And, you know, how the Senate race turns out, it could have an effect on the governor's race next year in terms of whether Kennedy might consider running for governor himself, or some of the Democrats who ran, if one of them does, you know, unexpectedly well, that candidate could go into the governor's race.
That's right. It could be a trial heat in that sense.
That's great. This is why we love having you both here, because you give us the information and the messages behind the numbers that we're all keeping an eye on. So,
and also because even though we don't even have a single return from tonight's races, we're already talking about the governor's race. This is what political junkies do. We're never satisfied. We're always looking ahead to the next one. We're like kids with cookies. But anyway, go ahead.
I love it. This is the Super Bowl for you guys, so we love having you here for it. I love to be right here with you guys because it's just fun to watch. But another race that we're keeping an eye on, of course, is Congress. Two of them. We have two seats that are in the Metro New Orleans area. Talk about those two races for us. First, of course, Steve Scalise, a major player in Congress and in the House, and so he's up for re-election tonight, expected to win as well.
He should win very easily. I know Donald Trump got, I think, over 70% or about 70% in that district in 2020 and in 2016. Scalise should do somewhere near that. The only candidate who really made a splash against him is Democrat Katie Darling. And she ran a very good campaign considering she's a Democrat in an ardently, overwhelmingly Republican district. But she knew she had an uphill climb. And you know, if she can get 25% of the vote, that would be an accomplishment. But we'll see.
Sure. And, you know, we have to keep in mind these two congressional seats. One is held by a Republican, one is held by a Democrat, Troy Carter. But both of those seats were districted in a way that a Republican would win one and hold it, and a Democrat would win one and hold it. So it's nothing remarkable that the Democrat will likely win a big re-election victory, and Scalise will likely win a re-election victory. And of course, it's important for Scalise that he does well, because he wants to be the House Majority Leader if the Republicans take control of the House tonight, which is very possible, and down the line, the Speaker. So you have to get elected in your seat to have all that happen, and so that's important.
And he wants to be able to say, look, I got as many votes as Donald Trump got, or even more.
Sure,
you know,
right.
And but if he gets, I don't think this will happen, but if he only gets, say, 55%, which I don't think is likely, I think he's going to get much more than that. But if he performs below expectations, that would not weigh in his favor. But again, I really believe he's going to romp, as is Troy Carter. Troy Carter is an African-American Democrat. That district is over 60% Democrat and over 60% African-American. He should get at least 60% of the vote, if not more.
It's amazing how quickly that incumbency really brings you the votes the second time around, given that he's only been in office a year and a half.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, he has worked it. In many ways, he has worked his district more than Cedric Richmond, his predecessor, who held that seat pretty safely for 10 years. So Carter will have earned his re-election, and Scalise will have also.
All right, so that's another race, of course, that we're going to be watching. State Senate also has a race. Former power player in the state of Louisiana, Karen Carter Peterson, of course, has pleaded guilty and has obviously had to resign her seat earlier. And so that is a race between two pretty popular Democrats. What are you guys thinking about that Senate District 5 race?
First of all, that district has a little bit of Metairie in it along Airline Highway, almost exclusively African-American precincts, and a big chunk of Orleans Parish. It has Uptown, not all of Uptown, but most of Uptown, Carrollton, Gerttown, Central City, the Garden District, the Lower Garden District, the Warehouse District, and the Central Business District. So that's a very important district in terms of, it's got the Superdome, most of the major hotels, and but it also has probably the most liberal constituency in the entire state. It is the most progressive / liberal district in the state of Louisiana, and that explains why you only have 2 people running, both of them liberal Democratic state representatives. The Republicans didn't even bother to field a candidate in that race. And the Democrats are a little bit heartbroken because both Mandy Landry, state representative from Uptown, and Royce Duplessis from Gertown and parts of Mid-City and Central City, they're both very popular among Democrats. They both are ardently pro-choice. Their votes on the hot-button issues align pretty much perfectly. So there's not a lot of difference between them. And they're both considered very accomplished representatives. And so
it's a loss that they're running against each other.
And they're running against each other, and they're having to attack each other because that's what candidates do. Right. So that's been the heartbreak for Democrats.
And both of them could have a long career. Yes. Whoever wins this seat will be a real power in New Orleans politics. And even the candidate who loses the seat isn't necessarily out of the game because they're still a state legislator. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this seat under reapportionment will change in the governor's election next year. So depending upon who wins, they may not be able to hold it.
Yeah, it's right now the district has a plurality of white voters, or even a majority of non-black voters. Right. Between whites and other races, that's a majority. And the black registration is somewhere like in the low 40s, around 41%. But in the new district, a year from now, it'll be 51% black. So it might be easier for Landry, who is white, to win the seat, but perhaps more difficult for her to hold it a year from now. And whereas it would be more difficult, perhaps, for Duplessis, who is African American, to win tonight, but easier if he wins to hold on to it next year. But every election's a unique event, and that's why Ron and I get so jazzed up about these things.
Now, the mayor's election isn't until for over 3 years, but whoever wins this seat very well could be a candidate for mayor.
That's true, too.
So let's keep that in there, too.
So we're talking governor's race and mayor's race several years, down the line. But we tonight, of course, we're expecting that we're going to see a big slug of votes coming in. But in the meantime, there's a chance that some people could still be in line at polling places. So let's get over to Scalise and Devin to talk about that a bit.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that some people might still be in line. Polls closed just less than 10 minutes ago. So we're going to go now to Eleanor Tabone.
She's standing ground by right now with Darren Lombard, I believe, at one of the polling sites. Eleanor, where are you right now?
Devin and Scalise, we are here at the Criminal District Court as behind me they start to clear up and take those ballots out of the machines. But as you mentioned, I am here with Orleans Parish Chief Elections Officer Darren Lombard, who's with me right now. Mr. Lombard, what is the process now that those polls have now been closed?
Well, now the commissioners start to pack up all the different documents we have for the voters. They also print out the actual results from the machines, and then they post those.
How long does it take, or when can we start seeing those results coming in?
You should start seeing some results at about 8:30, 8:45.
And you mentioned that all the commissioners will be bringing their ballots and their counts here, is that right?
Yes, they bring them in, and then we process them upstairs.
That's it. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Scalise and Devin, we'll take it back to you.
All right, Eleanor, thank you so much. We just showed you on the screen right now. It looks like we're getting some of those numbers just that are coming into our newsroom right now. If you want to put that back up for the U.S. Representatives 1st District, if I'm not mistaken, is that the early numbers that we can put up right now? All right, that is Steve Scalise right now, no surprise, leading with 75% of the vote, 24% for Katie Darling, 1% for Howard Kearney.
Yeah, and we still have a long way to go. Lots of things lots of ballots to count at this point. And we've got here incumbent Troy Carter ahead with 58% of the vote, and Dan Lux with 42% so far.
I know that they say that these numbers probably were going to go the way that they expect them to go. I don't know if we want to go over to Clancy Dubose to comment on that one. Clancy, I mean, no big surprises right now, right?
No big surprises at all. In fact, we can call this race for John Kennedy already because I'm seeing early voting numbers, and early voting numbers, especially in the rural parishes, really do project. I think they reflect what's going to happen on Election Day because there's nothing else on the ballot in a big swath of these rural parishes in Louisiana. And I'm seeing several dozen rural parishes in the U.S. Senate race where Kennedy is getting over 80% in many of these parishes. And so Kennedy's easily going to win. I don't know that he's going to win with 80%, but he's racking up a big number already, and we can project him the winner. We can also project Steve Scalise because I'm seeing results in his race. Whereas as I look at early voting, and again, early voting is not just a precinct here and a precinct there. It's early votes from all precincts in a certain parish.
Okay.
And I'm seeing Scalise getting 87% of the early votes in Lafourche Parish and 75% in Tangipahoa Parish. And as more early votes come in, it's
almost
clear
like
that
a poll sample, really.
It's a very good poll.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
a perfect poll sample because you're
Yeah.
getting it from all
Right.
over the parish. And so with those kind of numbers, we can easily project that Steve Scalise will be reelected. And let me take a look at Troy Carter's as well while we're here, because I think it's going to be the same story as we look at the early votes. See, some parishes load their early votes in early in the evening. Others, like Orleans Parish, loaded at the end of the day. So in Assumption Parish, Carter's got 58%, and that's all we're getting so far. But still, I don't see any way that Troy Carter loses this race. So we may as well project him the winner as well.
Okay,
We can
so-
call all three of those races.
Wow, 3 projections already, less than 15 minutes after the polls have closed. We already are saying incumbent John Kennedy will take the U.S. Senate seat for Louisiana once again. We are saying that Representative Steve Scalise is also going to take the Congressional District 1 race. Less than 15 minutes after the polls close, we are projecting him the winner. Now, also, Troy Carter, we're believing, is likely to do the same in a very short period of time to take the District 2 U.S. congressional seat from here in New Orleans. We're just waiting on the numbers to come in for Clancy to be able to project that, but we are seeing those things coming in from the Secretary of State's website after the polls just closed just a few minutes ago. Already, just that first slug. You know, we learned so much from those early and absentee votes that come in, especially when they're released in mass, before, like right after the polls close. That's a huge indicator, and obviously it is for you all tonight.
It is, and you know, and again, in Carter's race, for example, there are only 2 candidates. There's Troy Carter, and then there's a Republican who did very little, if any, campaigning.
Right.
And so, and he's getting basically the Republican vote, and not much else. And the early vote that's showing up, for example, in Assumption Parish, you have a significant amount of Republican voters in that parish, so that's why
So it's
Carter
skewing
was,
it a little
was
bit.
quote, only at 58% in
Right.
in the early votes. But I think he'll get more than that when it's all said and done.
Okay, and you all said that the main thing that we're watching tonight are the margins in some of these races.
Right.
Why is that so important for people who are just joining us?
Well, as Ron mentioned earlier, Scalise is watching the national returns on the congressional races closer than anybody else in Louisiana because he's in line to become the number 2 person in the entire House if Republicans capture a majority of the House, and they're only 5 seats away from doing that right now. Right. So if Republicans have a good night, Steve Scalise will become the majority leader in the House behind Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and probably within 2 to 4 years he'll be Speaker.
Yeah, very well possible. And just as a historical note, the last time Louisiana had a House Majority Leader was Hale Boggs back in the early 1970s.
And that was literally 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that is significant. So does the margin that Steve Scalise wins by, does that play a role in whether or not he
I think
secures
it
one of
does,
these
because if it's a
leadership
really
posts?
big one, it shows how strong he is at home, because he spent a lot of time, as did McCarthy, traveling around the country, raising money for and endorsing Republican candidates in key races. And 2 years ago, he made a real difference. He went into the districts that were considered unwinnable, and he turned about a dozen of them around. And it really brandished his status as a guy who could make a difference for Republican candidates around the country.
Right. And parties don't like to have leaders who are from swing states that they could lose. You know, they want people who are strong at home so they can devote their time to Washington.
So they know that they're strong. They're not going to lose them. They're going to build on that base that obviously Steve Scalise has been making across the country. It's interesting that he's probably glued to the national coverage, watching the national races more almost than his own, given that we're already projecting him as the winner, you know, less than 15 minutes after the polls close. So that is a true testament of what's happening with the voters, especially in his district. Carter, of course, is another one that we're going to be watching. And as we mentioned, this State Senate District 5 race in New Orleans is another one. We can get to that in just a second, but let's take a look at Troy Carter's 58% so far. Right there, we see that it says 0 of 632 precincts. Obviously, that means that this is the early and
votes.
absentee vote.
Right, yeah, and not only is it the early vote, it's very, very few of those even. So this is not much of an indication. Yeah.
Gotcha. And we saw, you know, the Republican had a pretty significant percentage.
Straight R balloting. That's just, and again, Ron, we were talking about, we didn't get to go into it too much, but Republicans outperform Democrats on early voting in Louisiana. So that's the only area where the early vote is not going to be representative of what we see on Election Day. I don't see any way that Lux upsets Troy Carter. Might hold him down to 57, 56%, but that's still a good vote for Troy Carter.
Okay, so that's what we're seeing so far as we're getting those early returns in. It's just those absentee and early votes coming in, and then we're still waiting to see even just 1 or 2 precincts. As we know, you get to vote even if it's after 8 o'clock, if you're in line, if you're inside the polling location. So there's a chance that people could have been voting for a little bit of time after the polls closed. So let's talk about some other things that we're going to be looking at tonight. We mentioned the impact of margins and how much we're going to be watching that as we see these different races play out. Some of which we already know what's going to happen. Now we're going to be paying attention to how much those people win by. Other races, the State Senate District 5 race. Do we want to pull that one up and see how we're looking there? Or we're going to look at U.S. Representative in the 5th District. Let's look at that. Let's look at that one. Julia Letlow is the incumbent.
That's no surprise. Julia
That's early
Letlow
votes
is the
as well.
incumbent.
And that's probably a pretty good amount of early votes, a lot of parishes. So we can project her the winner also.
Okay.
Because people are watching us up in the North Shore in Bogalusa and Tangipahoa, the northern parts of Washington Parish and Tangipahoa Parish are in that district. We have no results yet, no early vote and no precinct vote yet for a state senator in District 5, but we'll be getting those in the next 15 to 20 minutes, so we'll have an idea of what that looks like.
Now, a lot of those are in Orleans Parish, so...
The vast majority of that is in Orleans Parish, right?
So
but
there's always a question mark about Orleans Parish, about when it's going to end up coming in. Usually takes a while, right?
Well, we have a new chief elections officer in New Orleans. Let's see if it gets better this time.
Maybe different. Because it usually ends up at the end of the night is when we're finally getting those numbers.
We're always waiting on New Orleans.
Always waiting on New Orleans, yes.
But New Orleans is the biggest tranche of votes, so that's why it's difficult.
And we have the Algiers factor. They have to cross the river, and you know, logistically, it is quite a task for them to do it in Orleans.
And East New Orleans, they drive them in from the east. So
absolutely. All right, so
now,
those are some.
Now, it only takes a minute or two to cross that bridge in East New Orleans, but those numbers do come in late. So,
they do. They certainly do. So we, of course, are going to be keeping an eye on all those amendments that are on the ballot. There were 8 constitutional amendments that are really important when you look at what the issues are in those amendments, even though it seems like a huge slate of things that were on the ballot for people to decide this time. But we're going to be keeping an eye on those amendments. We're going to be watching that state Senate district race very closely as those returns start coming in, and of course all those national races as this night continues to play out. And now, where are we going next? Okay, we're gonna let's look at some more returns for you in just a second. Let's see what's coming in so far. State Senate District 5, not in yet. And we'll be right back right after this. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this extended election coverage for, of course, these intense midterm elections. We're keeping a close eye on some national races, those here at home and, of course, abroad. But we want to talk to our Eyewitness News political analyst and our pollster, Clancy Dubas, Ron Fauché. Thanks for being with me as we talk about these races that we're already able to call because of the large margins involved.
Well, we finally just got some early votes in. I shouldn't say finally because it's still very early in the evening, but we just got in the early voting returns from Jefferson Parish in the 2nd Congressional District race, which is Troy Carter's race. He, as expected, he romped in Jefferson Parish, which is bigger than all of the other early votes combined that we have so far. So we can safely project that Troy Carter will be reelected.
All right, that's our third prediction already tonight on our streaming apps and online. Clancy was able to project 2 winners in 2 other major races tonight already. Let's go through those and see what our early numbers are right now. But again, Troy Carter is projected to be the winner in the 2nd Congressional District already, thinking by a large margin. The other races that we've already projected, the U.S. Senate, John Kennedy projected as the winner. Clancy, any thoughts briefly?
No, really, there were only two questions about this race, and it was not will John Kennedy win. It would be what will his margin be, and then the other one was who would run second. Would it be Luke Mixon or Gary Chambers? And it's a close race so far.
All right, we'll continue.
And if they both stay in the teens, it's not good for either one of them in terms of running for governor next year.
Right.
All right, well, we're going to continue to watch that, but for now we want to go over to Devin and Charisse for more reaction.
Yeah, we have Lily Cummings that is standing by actually at Senator Kennedy's election campaign watch party in Baton Rouge right now. Let's go over live to Lily to see if there's been any reaction so far now that this race has been called here.
Hey, Charisse, I think we are just beginning to hear it right now in Baton Rouge. I just heard some cheers let out. Those are the first that we've heard all night long. I've been scanning the room as we called it back at the studio, wondering, am I going to hear any of those cheers, any reaction from the crowd? All we started to notice was that the room started to fill up, so we are expecting Senator Kennedy to come out here at any moment. I talked to some campaign staffers recently. They were expecting this to be a long night, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. They're expecting Senator Kennedy to come out at any point now and give a quick speech for us. And of course, we will come back to you all when that happens. But for now, you're looking at Senator Kennedy's election watch party from Baton Rouge. Reporting live, Lily Cummings, Eyewitness News.
All right, Lily, thank you so much. And let's take a look at more election results. If we can get someone on the screen right now, I think we're taking a look at U.S. Representative 1st District Steve Scalise. This is an incumbent that wasn't really much of a big surprise. That was called very early on, just minutes after the polls closed, actually. And of course, that's 72%. That's just with 1% reporting. But again, looking at the numbers, it looks like that is definitely the results there.
Oh, yeah, and those early votes made a big difference for him as well.
Right.
All right, see you all in about a half an hour. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Welcome back as we have our election 2022 coverage results that are coming in steadily into our newsroom. I'm Scalise Gibson.
And I'm Devin Bartolotto. We're going to head out now to Paul Murphy. He's at Congressman Steve Scalise's election night party out at Drago's in Metairie. And Paul, this was a pretty quick call, so this has now turned into a victory party. How are things there?
It certainly was, and there was a round of applause just a few minutes ago as word started filtering through the crowd here at Drago's Seafood, Steve Scalise's election watch party, that we had in fact called the race for the 15-year veteran congressman from Metairie. Now, joining us is the Jefferson Parish tax assessor, Tom Capella, who knows Steve Scalise well. Your thoughts on this win?
Obviously a great day for our district, our state, but more specifically for Steve and his family. He and I cut our teeth together in the legislature. I couldn't be more proud of him. He's very worthy, and it's going to be a big victory for his family, our district, and our state.
And talk about the big picture that we're seeing tonight. We're seeing that expected shift. The balance of power in the House could very well change tonight, and that would leave Steve Scalise poised to be the most powerful House leader from Louisiana since Hale Boggs.
Correct. I mean, you think about if the red wave comes and the House flips, Steve's floor is majority leader, could be even better than that, which is a huge job, not only for our district and our state, but for our country. And we haven't had the likes of that since Hale Boggs, since Bob Livingston was chairman of appropriations. This is even bigger than that. So really exciting. I know Steve's anxious for the rest of the country to follow suit. If they flip the House, Louisiana's in a really good position.
What does that mean for our area when you have someone like Steve Scalise in such a powerful position in Congress?
Well, not only Congressman Scalise, but some of the other electeds, current congressmen that get reelected, are going to prime to shoot right up in their committees, whether they go from just committee members to vice chairs or even some chairmen. But for Steve to be the majority whip at the base, at the floor, and maybe even better than that at the ceiling, he would have so much power to set the committees, to shift where the money goes, and again, bringing home the bacon is what you've heard for generations. We have a lot of needs here in Louisiana, our flood protection from hurricanes, redoing our aging infrastructure, and he's really going to be able to help with that if this red wave comes and the House flips to the Republican side, which it looks like it's going to do. So that, on top of Steve's big re-election, is really great news for us.
And on the other side of the equation, though, if the House flips, as it is expected to do, is there going to be a lot of turmoil up in Washington, more so than it is right now?
Listen, I think it's interesting. Steve Scalise cut our teeth together in the legislature with Mitch Landrieu and Cedric Richmond, and everybody had different people that they represented, but they could work on some issues. It seems like Congress and even on the local levels have gotten away from that. Hopefully the parties can work together when they can. Obviously you have to stick to what your constituents want and what your beliefs are, but obviously whenever there's a turnover, there's going to be some turmoil at the beginning, but we have some great young leaders up there that we think is going to smooth sailing for the Republican Party.
Exciting night for Jefferson Parish, correct?
It's really big, and again, besides Bob Livingston or Hale Boggs, this has the opportunity to be huge for Louisiana, obviously huge for Jefferson Parish, and my friend Steve Scalise and his family, so we're happy for it.
Thank you very much. Jefferson Parish Tax Assessor Tom Capella here at the Steve Scalise Watch Party at Drago's in Metairie. Back to you.
You don't want to call Troy Carter yet.
All right, and we are back.
Yeah, y'all ready?
Our technical guru here is trying to make sure that we have everything operating smoothly. We had some snags apparently with the Secretary of State's information, but we have smoothed that all out and we're good to go. So I am back here in the studio with Eyewitness News political analyst Clancy Dubose and political pollster Ron Fauché, giving us their expert opinions on what's happening tonight. Of course, you all have been able to make some calls very early on, just moments after the polls closed, just minutes after they closed, in several key races. Talk about how you're able to do that.
Well, first of all, I want to point out, for the sake of our viewers, any skeptics out there, we did not make this call based upon one precinct. We based it on early voting.
Yes.
And there's a lot more precincts in than just one or two precincts statewide, which is what you're seeing. When you see stuff on our graphics that say, for example, in Steve Scalise's graphic, it says one precinct out of 533. We looked at not just that one precinct, we looked at all of the early voting results from the parishes across the board that have reported, and most of them in Scalise's district did report their early votes right away, and he was winning by a huge margin. And those are parish-wide early votes. So it's like, as Ron pointed out, it's like having a really good poll in each of those parishes. Because you got hundreds and hundreds of votes, much more than you'd get on a poll, a standard poll.
Thousands, yeah.
And this is a pollster saying that.
Right.
So based upon that snapshot, we were able to call incumbent U.S. Senator John Kennedy a big winner, Steve Scalise a big winner, and Congressman Troy Carter a big winner. We may not be precise on the percentages, but they're both going to be, all three of those are going to be fairly easy winners tonight.
Yeah, and that's something that we expected. All three incumbents, Louisiana is somewhat of an easy state to predict in terms of incumbency in a situation like this.
One thing to watch, because I know our viewers here are going between national coverage and local coverage here, is that you have a different situation nationally. The Republican vote is almost like a bell curve, that early in the evening, the Republicans are not doing well because the early and mail votes are coming in some places first. That's why we saw Democrats in Georgia, for example, in North Carolina with big leads, and they weren't going to last. So over time, the Republican vote goes up, and it's beginning now to go up around the country. But then at the end, late
the
tonight,
rest of the mail-in
and then
ballots.
in the morning, then you get all the mail-in ballots from the West Coast in particular, and some other states. So then the Republican percentage actually starts going down again. So here in Louisiana, we don't have that same rhythm in this election. So, you know, looking at who's winning here and who's winning nationally are really, you know, on different tracks.
And there's two things to point out in addition to what Ron just pointed out. Number one, every state has its own set of election laws. Not every state relies upon early voting that much. Not every state even has mail balloting. So it's different in every single state. So when you look at Pennsylvania as compared to Georgia or Louisiana, you know, you got to look at that state's election laws. And then on top of that, when we talk about the Republicans do better as the night wears on, it's not like a football game where there's a comeback. The votes have been cast.
Right.
It's a question of whether they've been counted.
Right.
It's when the votes are counted, because you can't count votes until they come in, but the votes have been cast. So it's not like some people are saying, oh, how did all these votes suddenly show up? Well, they didn't suddenly show up. They were put in the mail a week ago, and the mail system is slow, and sometimes they're trucked in. You know, every state has a different method of getting those votes into the counting center. So that's why it looks like a bell curve. It looks like the Republicans were trailing, and then they're coming back. It's not a horse race. It's a question of how many people voted, and when do those ballots arrive so that they can be counted?
Exactly.
It's a results
Exactly.
race.
Exactly.
And that's something else that you guys are keeping a close eye on, is not just what results are coming in, but where. And that's one of the key things that helps you all determine whether or not you can call a race, and that's how we did it so quickly just minutes after the polls closed tonight. Now, we have a lot of races that we're keeping a close eye on. One of them that we didn't have results in from before is that Orleans Parish State Senate District race. That's District 5. That's the race to fill Karen Carter Peterson's former seat. And we have Mandy Landry and Royce Duplessis both vying for that seat. Let's take a look at the numbers of where they are right now. We are seeing at the Secretary of State's website, and hopefully we'll be able to get them on your screen. There we go. 1 out of 117 precincts so far filtering in from the Secretary of State. Royce Duplessis with a substantial lead, 71% over 29 for Mandy Landry. Can we tell anything from these numbers so far?
Yes, this is the early votes from Jefferson Parish. It's exactly that, 71 to 29. And to break it down even further, it's 49 votes for Duplessis, 20 votes for Landry, which means we can't tell anything about that. It's a handful of precincts with a very low early voting turnout, because in Jefferson Parish, there's nothing else on the ballot, other the local ballot. That's it.
Right.
So that's why the early votes were so low in Jefferson Parish. You're looking at, you know, 3 or 4 precincts where the early voting was really low. And that explains that, because there's no early votes yet from Orleans Parish.
Right.
And
it's highly unlikely that race would end up with that kind of a margin. It should be
Gotcha.
pretty close.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
And it's just a handful in so far.
Right.
So that's, but something that's interesting to watch. So we're going to keep tabs on it, of course. We, of course, talked about Steve Scalise a little while ago and the fact that, you know, he is poised to take a major leadership role in the House of Representatives if the red wave passes over the country, like many are anticipating that it might tonight. Talk about the margins that Steve Scalise might be elected by. What do those tell us? Is that important for us to watch for him, or what should we be?
It's important to
gleaning from
him
this?
for sure, but I think he'll easily get 65%,
Yeah.
maybe 70%, and that's
And that's fine for
And
his
considering that
politics,
the
yeah.
Democrat in that race, Katie Darling, did not have a lot of money, but she ran a very smart campaign for a candidate who was not well financed, and she ran as aggressive as she could, but it just didn't grab. You know,
That's tough.
She got her message out there, but it didn't produce the result that
Well,
I
and
think
there,
Democrats were
and there
looking
was
for.
such an imbalance of money.
Right.
You know, the incumbent had virtually unlimited money he could have spent.
And
had he
name
wanted to.
recognition.
Right.
Right. And, you know, Steve Scalise hasn't just been raising money for himself. He's been raising money for candidates all over the country and been doing very well at it, from
Right.
what you all are saying.
He does very well. And one statistic that's interesting, that Kevin McCarthy, who is now the Republican leader in the House and would be Speaker, assuming the Republicans win the House, he has raised over $500 million for Republican candidates for the House. So people say, well, why is Kevin McCarthy going to get the speakership? Well, he raised all of that money and has poured all of that money into these very people who are going to elect the speaker.
And many of those folks didn't have competitive races, so he might have given them, you know, $500,000.
Whatever,
Whereas
yeah.
in the hotly contested
There was
races, he
many
could go
millions,
and spend
sure.
$5 million or $10
Right,
million,
right.
and that's a boatload of money in a congressional district.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And this, you know, it's really interesting, as Paul Murphy mentioned, as we've mentioned, this really does stand to be a historic election for Louisiana in terms of his leadership position, given that the last time that we saw somebody in power
Sure.
was
It was
Hale
50
Boggs.
years ago, yeah.
50 years ago. So this is major for Louisiana, even if this election tonight doesn't feel like it's as major because we were able to call it so early in the
Right,
evening.
right.
But there are a lot of other things that we're watching tonight, too, as we continue our coverage of 2022's midterm elections, the big elections tonight. Some of those things are amendments. We're also keeping a close eye on some of the mayoral races in places around the metropolitan New Orleans area. There are races for Thibodeau mayor, some of the smaller mayors in the cities that are municipalities around Southeast Louisiana. So we're going to keep an eye on those. We're going to have those numbers for you as the night continues to go on. But in the meantime, we should probably talk about Troy Carter's district a little bit more and the fact that we were able to call that just a few moments ago. What are we looking at when we look at these numbers so far?
Okay, you only
60%, 60 to 40.
You got 9 of 632 precincts, which is about 1.5%. You know, so how can we call it? Well, because we're looking at early voting from most of the 10 parishes or so that are in that district. And more importantly, we're looking at the early voting returns from Jefferson Parish. He has a substantial portion of the West Bank of Jefferson and some from the East Bank of Jefferson, mostly majority black precincts, but some majority white precincts as well. And in Jefferson Parish, which had more early votes than all of the others combined that are reporting so far. And of course, Orleans has not yet reported, and Carter lives in Orleans. And Carter got 68% in Jefferson, and he's probably going to get at least that much, if not more. He's probably going to get more like 70 or 80% in Orleans. That tells us he's going to win. I mean, because we're talking about early votes, those are not 1 or 2 precincts. Those are all the precincts in the individual parishes that comprise the congressional district. So it's like, as Ron pointed out, and I've repeated several times now, that's like a really good poll sample. And so with that, and even better than a really good poll sample, these are actual returns. We're not projecting anything other than saying, based upon the historical knowledge that Ron and I think we have from
Yes.
watching these things for almost 50 years now, early voting in many cases really does give you a glimpse of what's going to happen on election day.
Right.
It's a perfect sample, almost.
But it is different when people are watching in these other states.
Yes.
Yes.
Because the Democrats are controlling early vote and the Republicans are controlling election day vote.
When you say
And you'll see that
controlling,
all
he
over.
means that they comprise the
Dominating.
majority
Exactly,
of the
yeah, they don't have
They
any
don't legal control.
any
yeah.
legal
No.
control over it.
These
right.
days, we got to watch our
We have to
metaphors,
watch
don't we?
everything now.
Yes,
so.
yes, they're dominating the early
Right,
vote.
right, right,
Let's just say
dominating
that,
the vote.
in the number of votes that are
Right,
coming
right.
in. This has been an interesting night so far. We've talked about the state Senate district race, which of course is dependent heavily on the Orleans Parish numbers. So that is something that we're still continuing to watch as the night continues to progress. We have those 8 constitutional amendments that we're going to be keeping a close eye on. And of course, we also just quickly want to talk about the charter change, because that's something that's really significant for people in Orleans Parish. It really is putting the conflict between the mayor and the city council on the ballot. And so this is what the numbers look like so far. Again, very little of Orleans Parish in so far, but 62% saying yes. They want the city council to have the approval of mayoral appointees. What can we take away from this so far, Glancy and Ron?
First of all, these are not Secretary of State numbers. These are our numbers, because we're gathering, we've got a team of voters, a team of election gatherers, result gatherers out across the city and even some in the Jefferson Parish. And so, because I'm looking at the results from the Secretary of State's website, and we don't have anything on that for Orleans Parish. I'm going to look at it again just to make sure. And
So those are just our exit poll numbers.
Yeah, these are our
Not
basically
exit poll,
not exit poll, but our numbers that we've gathered from selected precincts. And it really, I don't know which precincts those are, but those numbers don't surprise me.
Okay.
And if the final numbers looked something like that, it would not be a surprise at all.
Okay, well, we have much more election coverage for you tonight as we continue to look at the 2022 midterm elections. We'll have much more for you after just a few minutes.
Well, welcome back to our 2022 election coverage tonight. I'm Devin Bartolotta.
And I'm Sharice Gibson. So we've been talking about really the balance of power right now that we're seeing in the United States Senate. The race for the 1st Congressional District was one of the first contests we called tonight on our streaming coverage. And that one is not as big surprise, especially to our political analyst, Clancy Dubose, going to incumbent Steve Scalise. We know that Scalise is the current minority whip in the U.S. House of Representatives. There was plenty at stake nationally as he could rise to power really with the possible GOP takeover of the House. Clancy mentioned this earlier, that Scalise is watching the national returns rather more so than he's watching his own race.
Yeah, and his was very expected, as you mentioned, and this was really called just based on the early voting numbers. We're going to head out now to Paul Murphy. He's at Drago's in Metairie with the Steve Scalise campaign. Hi, Paul.
There's an excited crowd out here at the watch party for Congressman Steve Scalise. No one more happier than Matt Jewell, who used to work for the congressman when he up in Washington as an assistant to the House Minority Whip. Your thoughts about this victory tonight?
Well, look, this is a great victory for Southeast Louisiana to keep Congressman Scalise fighting for our values, fighting for the important issues that are important to Southeast Louisianians. So I'm incredibly happy that we're sending him back up to Washington to keep fighting for us.
And of course, we should say that you are the St. Charles Parish President. And let's talk. All right, we're going to head it back to the station.
All right, one of the hot races, of course, is the race for Congressional District 2. Incumbent Congressman Troy Carter is speaking right now, so let's take a quick listen to what he has to say.
Here. And my youngest son, Joshua, who is studying at Howard in Washington, D.C., couldn't be with us today. To all of my siblings, my dear brother Greg is here. My nieces and nephews are here. To my entire family. To all of you. To my incredible congressional staff. And to my incredible, give them a round, give them a round. My incredible staff both here in New Orleans, in Louisiana, and in DC. Incredible people who give their hearts, their souls, their time, their energy. They make me look good. Because they work hard and they really love the people of Louisiana. To my campaign staff, it really make me look good. Give them a round. To all of the elected officials that are out in the audience and those that are watching from near.
That is Congressman Troy Carter making his acceptance speech to start another term. We'll have more of him on WWL-TV Plus and, of course, on our website. Until we see you back here in about a half an hour, we will continue to cover election 2022 right here on Channel 4.
We can do something different by putting our best foot forward and advancing issues that are important to the people of Louisiana and demonstrating that when we do that, we can make a difference. 18 months ago, a very fast journey that seems a lifetime, but it's gone really fast. 18 months of going to the nation's capital and fighting for the people of Louisiana and bringing back the kind of revenues and the kind of advances for the people of Louisiana that's made a difference. $1.2 trillion in the infrastructure bill. Inflation Reduction Act. Reducing insulin prices. creating broadband in places that's never had it before, creating opportunities for people to have meaningful opportunities in an economy that has oftentimes left them out. Fighting for and bringing resources to issues of climate change and environmental justice. Making sure that every single part of LAO2 knows how much I love them and how important they are to this district. No one parish, no one group, no one people more important than anyone else. And on tonight, I say thank you. Tonight, I say thank you because no one does it alone, and God knows I have not done it alone. I've done it because of you, because of the great people of this state, the great people of this city, the great people of LAO2. Every single one of you deserves a very special thank you. And now we go back to work. Now we go back to work. Because today, just like 18 months ago, believe it or not, was the easiest part. Because now the work begins. The healing across our country. The unifying across our country. Rather, the Democrats hold control when we wake up tomorrow or not. The task is still the same. That's right. Govern, lead, and take care of the people. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do it together. We're going to continue to work. We're going to continue to pray. And we're going to make things happen for the people of Louisiana. And because of your confidence in me, you can be assured that I will wake up every single day with you in my heart, in my mind, and in my actions. God bless you all. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your money. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for believing in me. God bless you.
everyone, and thanks for watching our extended election coverage right here on WWL-TV Plus, and of course on our website and our social media apps. This is where the election analysis is happening with two of the best in the state, WWL-TV political analyst Clancy Dubas and pollster Ron Fauché. Thanks for being with us. One of the hottest races that we haven't really got to talk about a lot yet, because the Orleans Parish numbers have been sort of trickling in tonight, is that State Senate District 5 race. This is the race to fill Karen Carter Peterson's empty seat. Talk about what we're seeing in these numbers so far. Not a huge number in yet, but we are seeing some.
About 10% of the precincts reporting, plus the early vote from Jefferson Parish, which is marginal, very small in the early vote in Jefferson Parish. The vast majority of that district is in Orleans Parish. It includes everything from the downtown area and Gertown up through the Garden District, Central City, a lot of Uptown, and Carrollton. So it's a major part of the city. It's a big swath of the city's vote, and we will see many more votes coming in. And really, it depends on where these votes are coming from. So I don't think we can read a whole lot into it. This is one where you really can't look at a few precincts and say, oh, this person's winning, as we could do, say, in the federal elections for Senator Kennedy and for Congress members Scalise and Troy Carter.
And you have to keep in mind, both of these people are now state representatives. So a portion of the Senate districts in Duplessis is a state representative district, and a portion's in Landry. And presumably they will do their best in their own district. So until those numbers are worked out, it's going to be difficult to see where it's going.
Okay, but we do expect this to be somewhat of a nail biter tonight.
It should be, yeah. I would be shocked if the difference is more than 4%, 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
Both of those candidates, very popular within the Democratic Party in Louisiana.
And both good candidates.
And yeah, you were saying it was a little bit disappointing for some of the Democratic leadership because they're running against each other instead of each holding their own post. So that's something that we are going to be continuing to watch. The other main races tonight, we've already called. You all are, amazing at what you do, and so we were able to call them just a few minutes after the polls closed. Of course, we're talking about State Senator John Kennedy winning his seat back, his re-election bid. Congressman Steve Scalise, who is in a position for House leadership if the red wave, floods the country again, as it might tonight. In the rest of the country. And then, of course, Troy Carter, the Democrat from Orleans Parish and the river parishes, kind of up toward Baton Rouge. He easily has won re-election in his seat as well.
Right. And Carter, he's never served a full term yet. He got elected about a year and a half ago because Cedric Richmond, who had won that seat and held it for 10 years, joined the Biden administration. So that created an opening. And so he got into a runoff a year and a half ago with fellow Democrat Karen Carter Peterson. He got elected in that race with 55% of the vote. That was a special election. It was the only thing on the ballot. And now he's really establishing his baseline, in the 60% range, which is not a surprise at all, because when you look at that district, it's 63% African American, 62% Democrat. So he's getting his vote in that district.
Okay.
And interesting, Scalise was at 72, 73% of the vote. 2 years ago, he got 72%.
Wow.
And when Donald Trump carried that district by about the same margin.
I would also add that Congressman Garrett Graves, who represents the Baton Rouge-based district, has a big lead right now and will likely win very easily tonight. And that's significant, not only because it's another incumbent win, but he's a potential gubernatorial candidate or down the line of a U.S. Senate candidate. So that's something
we can
to watch.
safely call all of the other incumbents for Congress winning. Clay Higgins is winning in the 3rd district. We've already called the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And I think we called Julia Letlow earlier in the 4th.
Right, in North Louisiana.
And the 5th. The 4th district is the Shreveport area. There is no race there because incumbent Congressmember Johnson is reelected. He's a Republican. And here's Higgins in the 3rd with almost half of the precincts in. He's comfortably out ahead, and he's going to win that one handily. And I think like I said, there's nothing in the 4th because the incumbent was reelected with no opposition. Julia Letlow is handily winning the 5th. And in the 6th, that's Garrett Graves' district, and he's winning handily too. No surprises at any of those races.
And when this is over with, Louisiana will, of the 8 members of Congress we have, 2 senators, 6 House members, will continue to have only 1 Democrat in that whole delegation, and that's Troy Carter. All the others are Republicans.
Obviously, that has been controversial as we've been trying to redraw those congressional districts, and the challenge and the fight over whether or not we should have, in fact, 2 majority-minority districts in this state, or just the 1 like we have now. And this is the product of that. We have 1 majority-minority district, and that is Troy Carter.
And it's overwhelmingly minority-majority, and so that's
Yes, and we'll see how that continues.
That's the way it happens around the country. They squeeze all the Democrats into a few districts, or if the Democrats have the majority at the state legislature, they squeeze all the Republicans to as few districts as possible. And, so it's a game played by both parties at the state level.
We'll see how that continues to play out in the courts. But, lots to get to tonight. We've been talking about that state Senate district that we went over just a little while ago, the congressional races. Around the country, are we getting any indication of whether or not that red wave is passing over? Have you had a chance to look at the numbers there,
Well, it
Ron?
looks like in some of the early states where the results came in, there is evidence of a pretty strong Republican wave. The last thing we saw in Virginia, for example, where a couple of the Democratic members of the House look like at this point they're losing. That's not good for Democrats. Florida's interesting. Florida looks like it keeps swinging more and more over to the Republicans. Ron DeSantis is on schedule to win a big victory for re-election, and Marco Rubio a big victory, for his re-election to the Senate. And what's really interesting is it looks like these Republicans are leading in Miami-Dade, which is usually one of the base votes for Democrats in Florida. So if the Democrats lose Miami-Dade, Florida will no longer be the swing state that we remember it from 2000. It'll become a pretty solid Republican state.
Pretty solid.
And it looks like that's where they're headed now.
Okay. Well, that'll certainly play a significant role in the next presidential election. We're obviously hearing from former President Trump that he may be entering that race. There's been a lot of talk of that, a lot of him talking about the leadership in Congress and in particular in the House, where he has already thrown his support for a speaker candidate.
Right.
And we've been talking about him a little bit tonight, too, because of the fact that Steve Scalise is right there in the wings.
Right. And one thing I would add, too, is I know in our viewership we have people in Alabama, but Katie Britt has easily won the U.S. Senate seat in Alabama that's now held by Richard Shelby. She was expected to win. She was chief of staff for Senator Shelby, and so Alabama will have a new U.S. Senator after tonight.
Okay, that's big news on the national front. So lots of that big news happening around the country. And then here at home, we're really talking about the margins that these people have won by. I mean, you mentioned that earlier tonight, Clancy, that we're going to be keeping a close eye on those things. It was important for Steve Scalise to get a good majority, to get a good margin of victory.
It looks like all the incumbents are getting big margins.
Yeah. And what does that say about how
people
they're supported?
people know their Congress members and they like them. It's but they're also they each fit their district and their district fits them.
Right, and the districts were drawn for them.
For them, that's right.
And we can't forget, most of them didn't have particularly strong opponents. And when I say strong, I don't mean as human beings they weren't potentially good candidates, but they just didn't have the money or the organization. And when you're an incumbent in Congress, you can raise a whole lot of money, and when you're not, it's hard, unless you have a political party behind you.
Is this also a function of turnout? Because Louisiana, as you just mentioned, didn't have those charismatic candidates that people needed to go to the polls to get behind, at least that didn't have the resources and the money in order to make a big splash. Is this a function of turnout?
Well, it is, but it's really a function of the national parties and interest groups didn't target any of the races in Louisiana because they assumed that the Republicans would win what they won, and the Democrat would win the one seat that he was going to be ahead for. So there was nothing really in play in Louisiana. So all the money, all the effort went elsewhere.
Yeah. And what does that cost Louisiana? Is that good for Louisiana that the money's going elsewhere and we're not?
Everything in politics is a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
as it is in life.
Sure.
It costs us, in the sense that you don't have a lot of money being spent here on advertising and people maybe getting temporary jobs in campaigns. But on the other hand, it's an advantage in that you can have somebody like Steve Scalise rise up in the leadership because they know he's got a safe district.
And that's the first time that's happened since Hale Boggs, if that is the
First
case.
time in 50
That's
years.
If he takes on that significant of a
And
leadership
one
role.
thing I would point out is the amount of money that's now being spent in these competitive partisan races around the country is in the stratosphere. Not too long ago, if you spent $10 million in a U.S. Senate race, that was a lot of money. In Pennsylvania, they already spent over $320 million so far.
That's
and
insane.
some of the other races were over $200 million. And it's just an awful lot of money that's going into these big targeted elections.
Right now, we're looking at Steve Scalise making his way through the crowd there at his campaign party tonight. It's at Drago's in Metairie in Fat City. Paul Murphy is there covering that campaign event for us. And we're talking about big money. Steve Scalise is the big money man in the Republican Party these days, one of them anyway.
Yeah, so other than Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who raises more money than anybody almost, Scalise, and he's also very effective as a campaigner. He's a very good speaker on the stump. When he goes into other districts, people around the country know him because of the tragedy that befell him when someone tried to kill him, and it was an assassination attempt, literally. And he had this he had a miraculous recovery because his life hung in the balance for over a week. And he came back, and because of that, he's become almost a household name, especially in Republican parts of the country. And he's a very popular fundraiser, and he's a popular draw. If he goes to somebody's district in a battleground state, and his name goes out there among Republicans, they will show up to hear him and spend money. And he made a big difference 2 years ago in getting the Republicans as close as they are to having a majority this time.
Now we're looking at Joe Lopinto, the sheriff of Jefferson Parish, another powerful politician in Louisiana, introducing Steve Scalise there in Fat City at Drago's. We're going to listen to him in just a minute once Congressman.
And I would point out that
Scalise.
when Lopinto first ran for sheriff, he had a very tough race. Scalise came out for him early on and got behind him. So there's a friendship there that goes back to when they both served in the legislature, back in the early 2000s.
Yep, they've known each other for quite some time, and now Joe Lopinto is about to hand that microphone over to Steve Scalise. Of course, he is winning again re-election tonight by a very large margin. In fact, the same margin that he won last time.
72%.
Yeah, which is a significant mandate.
Yes, it's a bigger margin than Donald Trump got in the state. Or even in that district, I believe.
Yeah, very popular among Republican circles in Louisiana. I think it's safe to say that.
Yes.
And so this was not unexpected tonight.
No, not at all.
It was expected,
Right.
very much so. So Congressman Steve Scalise is about to take the podium, and you can see him there. So let's take a listen.
Well, thank you, Louisiana. What an honor it is to be reelected to continue representing Southeast Louisiana in the United States Congress. I can't thank you enough for the ability to do that for another 2 years. Thank you, Sheriff Lopinto. Thank all law enforcement who risk their lives every day to keep our community safe. I'll start by thanking God and by thanking my family, Jennifer, Madison, Harrison, for the sacrifices they made. Thank you. On behalf of all of us, we can't thank the people of Southeast Louisiana enough. And let me tell you what this election has been about, because I think if you look at what's happening here at home, you see it in a lot of other places too. I've had the opportunity to travel to a lot of different states. We've been probably to about over 28 states in these last few months, helping candidates, getting to meet some of the phenomenal people that want to come and be a part of a Congress that works for people, works for families, starts addressing these problems. We've talked a lot, not just here in Southeast Louisiana, all across the country, about what we need to do to combat inflation. We need to lower the price of things that families are paying when they go to the grocery store, when they go to the gas station. And Louisiana knows something about how to produce American energy. We need to make more of it. And whether I'm in Maine, which I was in not too long ago, or Portland, Oregon, and every point in between, they recognize the importance of American energy. And what I share with them is what we know here in Southeast Louisiana. Nobody makes energy cleaner, nobody makes it better, nobody makes it more cost efficient than the people of Louisiana and the people of the United States. We need to be making more energy in America, not begging foreign dictators, not Russia, not Iran, not Saudi Arabia. Let's make more of it here in America and lower the cost of energy. And of course, that doesn't just help families all across America, which it does. It also helps us restore our coast, because when we are producing energy in America, it produces those vital coastal restoration dollars so that our frontline parishes, you know, when you're out at Port Fourchon, you see the great energy infrastructure. But when you go to Grand Isle, who's another frontline area that stops, if we build up those coastal areas, it stops storms before they hit land where higher population centers are. And so we talk about those issues all around the country. But
Well, welcome back to our election 2022 coverage. I'm Cherise Gibson.
And I'm Devin Bartolotta. We're going to head out right now to Metairie, where Steve Scalise is speaking right now as he was just reelected.
we need to reverse that tide. We need to back the blue. And at the federal level, we need to make sure the federal grant dollars to law enforcement go to help and give our police officers the tools they need, not only to keep us safe, but they need to be able to go home safely to their families at night too. And that's what we're going to focus those dollars on. Look, we've got a lot of big challenges. Obviously, there's other elections going on, and it's going to be a late night watching these returns. We've only had a few states called. Florida was the first state to come in. And look, if we're going to get a Republican majority, which I sure hope we do, and I'm very confident we do, we needed to flip 6 seats at the beginning of the night. When Florida closed, we already got 4 of those 6 seats just out of Florida. And I already talked to those candidates. I was actually in Florida last week helping each of those 4, and they're phenomenal new members of Congress. They're ready to get to work. I was in New York with my current colleague, hopefully the next governor of New York, Lee Zeldin. We were in New York last week too. The people of New York want to take their state back. There's something going on all across this country. But let me tell you, it starts right here. It starts with the people in this room, the people that have been there with us from the beginning, who share that same conservative vision. We're here at Drago's, and I look at Clara Satanovich and Tommy Satanovich. What a great family restaurant this is. And Drago's is like so many other small businesses. They struggle with the daily challenges, supply chain shortage, inflation, the things that it does, hiring more people, trying to get more people. We shouldn't be paying millions of people to sit at home and work when there's jobs out there for them. Let's get people back in the workforce. It would shore up Social Security and shore up Medicare. We need to make Washington work for people again, and that's what the focus is going to be. So I look forward to the challenge. I look forward to getting back to work for you. Thank you again for the honor, Southeast Louisiana. Look forward to another 2 years fighting for your values in Congress. God bless you. Let's celebrate.
All right, you just heard there from Congressman Steve Scalise. He's the current minority whip of the House of Representatives, and obviously a lot at stake for him nationally. He could rise to power if, of course, he talks about that GOP takeover in the House.
Yeah, that was a race that was called pretty early by our Clancy Dubose based on just early voting, and it looks as though all of our Louisiana delegation is likely to head back to Washington for their next terms.
All right, and of course, Scalise has served for the 1st Congressional District. That has been since 2008. That was a major race that we were watching, but of course, again, as he just mentioned there, he went on as the incumbent, expected to get in there, and he's keeping his eye, like the rest of the country is, on where that balance of power is going to tip towards Republicans or Democrats as the other races are called.
Yes, there's certainly much more to come tonight, especially upcoming tonight at 10 o'clock. So thank you for streaming with us and being with us on air, and we will see you then.
in a runoff.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this extended WWL-TV Plus, our website and our social media apps. We are bringing you the latest analysis and numbers as they come in. Polls closed, of course, about 90 minutes ago at 8 o'clock. And so we have been bringing you that extended coverage ever since then. I am here in the studio with Eyewitness News political analyst Clancy Dubos and pollster Ron Fauché, who's joining us. Just talk generally about the turnout tonight. Is it what you expected, given the fact that we're seeing what we expected at the polls?
Yeah, I think it is. It's not a giant turnout, but it's not an embarrassing turnout either. John Kennedy was a heavy favorite. He was the big spender. He raised, I think, over $30 million to campaign in this thing. And he has spent a lot of it. His ads were very effective for him. It was his message talking to his vote, which is largely rural and suburban. And his message worked very well in those areas. And he's getting, well above 60% so far. And that's not a big surprise.
Not a surprise.
Which is, by the way, a bigger vote than Donald Trump got 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Donald Trump got 58%, which is a big margin in Louisiana. But Kennedy's getting substantially more than that.
Even more than that. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about, which you said was a really important race, was Public Service Commissioner. Let's talk about that a little bit and see if we can pull up those numbers.
I was just looking at that. I'm going to refresh my numbers here and pull up, because I think I can get more numbers from the Secretary of State's site.
Here we are. At least, oh yes, you probably can. But what we have, at least in our system right now, is this.
That's what I have,
Public Service Commission, District 3, Lambert-Boissier, 43% so far, Devontae Lewis, 16%, Gregory Manning and Willie Jones following
that's a
from there.
little over 40% of the vote, and it's not much vote out of Orleans Parish. And he's getting a majority of the vote in Orleans, but barely a majority so far. And if that holds up, it looks like Boissier would be headed to a runoff, but it's a really close contest, as you can see there, for second place between Devontae Lewis and Gregory Manning, both of whom were kind of a tag team against Boissier during the primary. They were taking turns beating up on him. And Boissier was attacked by out-of-state progressive PAC money interests, very progressive, very left-wing groups that came in and supported, say, Susan Hudson for sheriff last year. And a little over a year and a half ago, they supported, or last year at this time, they also supported in the DA's race, our DA, Jason Williams.
Jason Williams, right.
And so, the progressive wing is flexing its muscle in Orleans Parish.
Why this race? Why the Public Service Commission?
Oh, it's about climate change. It's not exactly the same people, but it's the same part of the political spectrum. It's the progressive left wing, which cares about, pro-choice issues, but in this case, it's climate change. And they wanted to target somebody like Boissier, saying he's not doing enough to protect us from climate change. And it's interesting because he won consumer advocacy awards as a public service commissioner from a group like the Alliance for Affordable Energy, which is also for, alternative energy sources and for fighting climate change. So there's a lot of cross currents there, but it's not a high profile race. And I want Ron to weigh in on this if he can, but with the disclaimer that Ron had done some polling for Boissier, but you still know the race and you know the kind of politics that go into it.
Well, one of the things that has been particularly interesting about some recent elections, as you said, this is really about the first time Louisiana's seen this, is how outside money is coming in for local races. We've seen outside money coming in for races for Congress, U.S. Senate, maybe here and there for governor. But for elections like district attorney and sheriff and judgeship elections
local races,
and the public service race, it's very, very unusual. And so, we'll have to see where it's going.
Well, the progressives are doing what the Republicans started doing 30 and 40 years ago, starting at the local race, and that, they said they recognize that change comes from the bottom up, and Republicans started building their party at the ground level, at the state legislative base and at the state level, and maybe this is the tack that, it appears to be the tack that progressives want to take. They're going to start looking at trying to win local races and building a cadre of leadership, a new generation of leadership at the ground level. And, we'll see how that works out.
But what's particularly interesting is they're using out-of-state money to do it,
Yes.
which doesn't always happen
Right.
in the States.
That's true,
Certainly
too.
not. Do we think that's a national trend, or is that something we're
very
just
much
seeing
so.
here in
Yes,
Louisiana?
It's very
much.
much so, because all of these groups are putting just enormous amounts of money into
Yeah, they spent
politics
over
these days.
$500,000 not promoting any one candidate that's running against Boissier, but simply saying, do not vote for Boissier. And this is a very liberal, very left-leaning group, but they can raise a lot of money because they've got big backers around the country who are willing to put up money to support progressive candidates or to attack mainstream candidates, moderate candidates, and that's certainly what Boissier would be. Now, he's going to run first, and he should be somewhere above 40%, and it may even be above 45%. I think it's going to be around 45% when Orleans Parish comes in, and maybe 46%. And his opponent might be less than 20% or somewhere around 20 or the low 20s. But we don't know yet whether that's going to be Devontae Lewis or Gregory Manning or Willie Jones. It's going to be, I think, between Lewis and Manning, and whoever doesn't make it will endorse the other. I'm confident of that. But then it gets down to what happens then. We get to December. You really get to a point of turnout at that point. Who's motivated to turn out? And the
it'll be very
progressives
small.
in a low turnout race, that's how Susan Hudson got elected, and that's how
Jason
Jason Williams got elected. Very low turnout elections, and progressives were highly motivated, and they turned out their vote. And when you only have, say, a 28% turnout or something like that, it's not that difficult if you have a highly motivated group like progressives to capture various political offices.
Especially one with an influx of cash.
Yes.
That can inject that into the local race. So we'll keep watching that
This is
pretty
one that
closely.
we're going to be watching all the way through December 10th.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see if that also plays a role in these big statewide elections that we have coming up. Governor, of course, is coming up next.
Right.
And then, more mayoral races where...
Sure.
It would be much less effective in a governor's race unless you have a really viable candidate, somebody like a John Bell Edwards, but that race has already been run. Anybody who runs the previous race, it's like the army that fights the previous war, almost always loses. If somebody out there says, well, I'm going to do like John Bell Edwards did, you're going to lose because you don't have John Bell Edwards and you don't have David Vitter. It's a completely different field. The state has moved beyond wherever it was 8 years ago. There's a whole different set of issues. There's a whole different dynamic.
Can we predict anything in those upcoming races from what we're seeing tonight? Are any of these races an indicator of what's to come?
Well, I think as Ron alluded to very early in the evening, with the big vote that John Kennedy's getting, his name has already been floated around in a lot of circles about possibly running for governor. But I have to add, in the last 5 election cycles, his name was floated, and he flirted with it, and then ultimately didn't run. But if he does run, that would change the calculus across the board on the Republican side.
And that's already been jockeyed around for several years now, so that would be
Jeff
interesting.
Landry already has the endorsement of the Republican Executive Committee, but if Kennedy gets in, that endorsement means less than nothing, I would think, at this point.
I would think
It'd be a
so,
complete waste of time.
It would be a huge
I don't know how
disruptor.
much it means anyway when you have other major Republicans
Sure,
running,
right.
but it would mean next to nothing or less than nothing if Kennedy gets in the race.
So that would be very interesting
Right.
and something to watch for sure
Right.
as we continue in the next several months and
Exactly.
years. What about some of these smaller local races? Have you guys been keeping tabs on any of them tonight that you've had your eye on? We know there are Court of Appeal races for some judges out there. We know there are some smaller judicial races in Orleans Parish, some smaller mayoral races that we've been keeping tabs on a little bit and bringing some of those results, at least
I'm
online.
going to get that to you right now.
On our app. Clancy's on it. He's looking it
The
up.
Court of Appeal, there's a Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal race, which is an at-large race in Orleans, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines. Karen Herman, as expected, is running first. She's got a 51% right now, with a little over half of the vote in, but none of the early vote from Orleans Parish, and but roughly 225 out of 403 votes, precincts, I should say. So that's, about not quite 60%, but, it's about 55 or so % of the vote in. that looks good for Karen Herman. When the rest of the vote comes in from Orleans, I think Herman will be the winner, but I'm not going to predict it just yet. I'd like to see a few more votes, but I do think I'm leaning very heavily towards saying that Karen Herman's going to win this race outright.
All right, she, of course, is a criminal district court judge.
She's the only one who's a judge right now.
And Joseph Gow, former congressman in Orleans Parish.
But he's a Republican, and that's, it's not a Republican-heavy district. Even though it consists of 3 parishes, New Orleans has probably 60 or 2/3
Vast
of the
majority.
vote.
Well over that. Yeah.
Okay, Plaquemines Parish President, we want to look at that right now. Keith Hinckley appears to be on top right now. This is 21 of 21 precincts reporting,
That's
so
it.
100% in. So Keith Hinckley
And the
is
incumbent did not make the runoff, Kirk Lapine.
Right.
And it's a runoff with Benny Russo.
Right. Benny Roussel,
Roussel.
Keith Hinckley, Kirk Lapine, the current Plaquemines Parish President, as you just mentioned, not in the runoff. So we will see a runoff in that one. Bogalusa Mayor. This is also quite an upset. Tyron Trung is the winner, a Democrat winning the mayoral race in Bogalusa. Wendy O'Quinn Perrette was the former mayor, the previous mayor, the incumbent, defeated by a significant margin there in Bogalusa.
Yeah, well, Bogalusa has a significant black voting population now. Unlike, Washington Parish is majority white, but Bogalusa has, I'm not sure if it's majority black, but it definitely has a very sizable minority voting bloc up there.
And so you think that had played a big role in this tonight. Amendment 1, let's go through these state constitutional amendments. There are 8 of them.
I think we can call this one. That one dies. That's the one that was to authorize
stock market investments.
Stock market, well, they can already invest in the stock market, but they were going to raise it from 35% to 65%, and it's failing by a margin of 65%. They're saying, no, let's not play the stock market. What's interesting, the stock market has been down going into this, and it didn't come back up until a couple of days ago. So yeah.
Amendment 2. Now, this would expand the property tax homestead exemption for disabled veterans.
Yes.
Looks like that's easily winning tonight.
Anything that expands, it says expand homestead exemption, people are going to say yes.
Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is when you expand the homestead exemption for a group of taxpayers, you're in effect raising property taxes for everybody else.
Yep.
People usually don't realize that, but that's what happens.
Yeah, it offsets itself,
Yes,
certainly. Now, Amendment 3, civil service election rules. Now, this affects classified workers in the state and in local
classified workers,
governments.
and it allowed them to get involved in political campaigns of their family members. And family members was defined pretty broadly. And people said, you know what, we want to keep, the main reason we have civil service more than anything else, what drove it back in the 40s and 50s when they really adopted it, was to protect public workers, public employees from being forced to work in campaigns, from politicizing the whole employment process at the governmental level. And so enough people remember that and said, no, we're not going to do that. Not even a little bit of an exception.
No, that was a huge defeat. Amendment 4, this waived the water charges. This is where
it was allowing local water boards, not Orleans Parish, mostly rural water districts where people have a busted pipe and it's not they don't think it's their fault, and it's really a rural issue. But I'm sure that people in New Orleans says, oh yeah, let's waive the water charges, so they voted for that. And it means a lot in rural Louisiana, and that's passing with one of the bigger margins.
Okay, passing pretty easily. Let's go to Amendment 5 now. This would set a time to set property tax rates. It would allow them more time to set the property tax rates.
I think people didn't really understand this because it was not, the language on the ballot did not sell it.
Incredibly confusing.
Because this is really, this is the kind of thing that people should want to vote for, because it would allow, a lot of times local governments, when right before there's a reassessment, they will raise the millage rate back up to the maximum allowed just for 1 year to preserve it. Whereas when voters pass a millage, let's say, and they say you can impose up to 5 mills, they won't always impose 5 mills. They might impose 3.5. But the way the Constitution reads now and the way it's interpreted, if you don't put it at 5 mills at least once every 4 years, whatever your maximum was, that becomes the new maximum.
Okay.
So it's complicated, but if voters understood that, they would have said yes.
Well, it's definitely
that's-
clear no on that one.
But it's not just the voters didn't understand it, the proponents didn't explain it very well.
Gotcha. Amendment 6. Now, this is an Orleans Parish issue. This limits the property tax increases for parish property. Now, talk about this one a little bit. Looks
This
like
one, let me say this. There's a lot of Orleans Parish not yet counted, and when it comes in, that may well pass, but may well pass very narrowly. Because it only applies to Orleans Parish, it has to pass statewide and in Orleans Parish. And what it does is that amendment caps at 10% a year the amount that homes can be, a property can be assessed at a higher rate. In other words, your property tax assessment, if this passes, could not go up by more than 10% a year. And it came about because people were seeing, frankly, a lot as a result of short-term rentals driving up and spiking property values around town. People's assessments were doubling or going up two and a half times. Folks, who had pretty stable assessments suddenly had to pay, 2 and 3 times their property tax rates. This was a measure designed to protect that.
Yeah.
And if that loses, it doesn't mean the people of the state are against doing what Clancy said. In fact, I would dare say a vast majority would support that. But they see this constitutional amendment on the ballot, and it refers to New Orleans property taxes, and they don't know what that's about. They haven't heard anything about it. Nobody's explained it in any other part of the state. Didn't really explain it that well here, for that matter. And so they just vote against it. So, that's some of the vagaries that you have in this type of an election.
That's what makes these difficult, for sure.
Right. But again, it may yet pass narrowly once the vote in Orleans comes in totally.
When it all shakes out. All right, Amendment 7. This would prohibit involuntary servitude. We had the author of this constitutional amendment coming out later saying he did not support it and he wanted people to vote against it, and it looks like people listened.
Yes, it's not because people in Louisiana want involuntary servitude. It was it was well drafted at the beginning. It got kind of followed up in the adoption process by a handful of amendments that kept changing the language around, and it got toward the end of the session, and that's when language can get kind of sloppy, and that's what happened. And so the author of the amendment, once it got put on the ballot, when it started getting examined more closely, said, you know what, this is not right. Let's all vote against it. We'll start over next year and try to get it right. It has to do with prison labor is what it's really all about.
Okay. Well, let's check out Amendment 8. This would remove, this would have a frozen property tax assessment for permanently disabled people. So it would freeze their property tax assessments.
And it would remove the requirement that they have to reapply every year. That once they get certified, they don't need to keep applying. It would just say, once you're in, you're in.
Yeah, and this is really just to limit red tape, frankly.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Well, it's passing. Now, we did get some new numbers in. Orleans Parish is finally starting to really come in now. This is that State Senate District 5 race between Royce Duplessis and Mandy Landry. What can we glean from this so far?
Well,
45% reporting.
A little bit more than 600, about 650 votes separating the two candidates. So that may not sound like a lot, but that is significant. But you've got more than half of the precincts still out, so this is what we thought we'd see.
Right.
Something
but we
very
don't
close.
know how much of Landry's district and Duplessis's district is in this number.
So it's both the geography and the racial makeup, because the district is overwhelmingly Democratic. It's a question of how many white precincts are out, how many black precincts are out, and how those white precincts and black precincts are voting. How much crossover voting are we seeing?
Okay, all right. Our political analysts are going to stay with us.
Yes.
And we are going to come back in just a little while to join you for the Eyewitness News at 10 on WWL-TV. And of course, we'll have it on our website and our apps as well. Until then, that's going to do it for our election 2022 coverage here on WWL+.
WWL-TV. This is the Eyewitness News at 10.
Well, good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Scalise Gibson.
And I'm Devin Bartolotta. America headed to the polls today for the midterm elections. Across the nation, there are still a number of races tonight that are too close to call. Right now, CBS News is reporting the U.S. House of Representatives is leaning Republican. The Senate still too close.
Well, locally, Steve Scalise, Troy Carter, and John Kennedy were all re-elected to their seats. We have team coverage tonight in New Orleans, the North Shore, and also in Baton Rouge.
We're going to head up to Baton Rouge right now, where Lily Cummings is, and she is with the Kennedy campaign, and John Kennedy is expected to be speaking very shortly. Lily?
Hey, Devin, that is right. John Kennedy actually just took the stage, so I'm going to step out of the way. We're expecting to hear from him right now at 10 p.m. They just walked onto the stage moments ago, and his campaign staff is telling me that they expect him to start speaking exactly at 10 p.m., so it should be within just the next minute or so. Again, a lot of the crowd is gathered around the stage waiting on this to begin. It sounds like they're going to have him speak now. Well, they are still waiting for him to start his speech. The music dimmed down for just a second, and everyone felt like he was coming, but it seems like it's been delayed for a few minutes here.
All right, Lily, thank you so much. I think we're going to head back to you.
All right, here we go. He is beginning to. We have the announcement happening now, and he's walking in. Senator John Kennedy taking the stage.
God is great. Dogs are good. And the people of Louisiana are star-spangled awesome. I think about 87% of the vote is in. We're at 65%. The appropriate members of the media and officialdom have called the race. So I wanted to come out. These numbers take my breath away. They take my breath away. What I want to do is talk for a few minutes. I'm going to talk tonight about Louisiana. I'm not going to talk long. But first, I need to recognize some people and thank some people. And then I just want to give you a word from my heart about Louisiana. I want to start with my opponents. Now, let me tell you something. I don't hate anyone. I don't. I look for grace wherever I can find it. And I've always believed that there's always something to be thankful for. And when I say my prayers, one of the things I ask for is, God, don't let me hate. Now, it's hard in Washington, D.C. I'm not going to kid you, because the deck is so stacked and it's so partisan. And many a day, I get up in my overpriced Capitol Hill apartment and start walking over to the Capitol, and I say, today, Kennedy, you're going to follow Jesus. And by 10:30, I want to follow Jesus and slap the hell out of somebody. But I don't hate anyone, and I sure don't hate my opponents, and I want to congratulate all of my opponents. There were 13 of us in this race. 13 of us, and I want to read their names. They deserve it. Beryl Billiot, this is an alphabetical order. Beryl Billiot, Gary Chambers, Devin Lance Graham, Zon John, W. Thomas LaFontaine Olson, Bradley McMorris, Vinny Mendoza, Luke Mixon, Salvador P. Rodriguez, Aaron Sigler, Soretta Stibe and Thomas Wynn. And I want to thank them for running, congratulate them, and the fact that I could get 65% or however it ends up against that many fine people, it takes my breath away. I've got some people here tonight from my family I want to introduce you to. First, my older brother, Dr. Tom Kennedy, is here from Williamsburg, Virginia. Tom went through high school, college.
All right, we're
medical
listening to Senator John Kennedy, also easily re-won the U.S. Senate seat. He was fighting. There were several candidates, as he just listed right there as we spoke. There were fighting to unseat Senator Kennedy, and he was, well, really, if you look at our history in Louisiana, we've not elected a Democrat to the U.S. Senate in, what, about 14 years?
Yes, and I mean, there were 12 opponents in this race, and but this was expected, and this was one that was called very early by our team here. We're going to head out now to Meg Ferris. She has been watching the state Senate race between Royce Duplessis and Mandy Landry, rather. Meg, can you hear us now? It looks like you're at Duplessis headquarters tonight.
Yes, that's right, Devin. And it's quite a different story here than it is with John Kennedy. People here still don't know who the winner is going to be. There's only 49% of the precincts in out of 117, and right now Royce Duplessis is in the lead with 54%, but still way too close to call. And his competitor, Ms. Landry, as you mentioned, their headquarters where they're having their party is just about a mile from here, where we will go afterwards. But right now they're just waiting. The candidate himself is not here. He was on the corner of St. Charles and Napoleon shaking hands and had bands out there and campaigning. But the mood is good here because they know that he's in the lead, at least for now, even though there's not even half of the precincts in. But both candidates are attorneys. Both candidates have positions in the state legislature as representatives, and both were trying to take over this seat that Karen Carter Peterson resigned from back in April. So that's it from here. Nothing to report at this point as who the winner could be, and the people here are just waiting for the candidate. Reporting live from the Ashe Center, Meg Ferris, Eyewitness News.
All right, Meg, thank you so much. Well, there was a big upset tonight in the Bogalusa mayor's race. Take a look at your screen. Tyron Trung was elected mayor tonight. He beat incumbent mayor Wendy Perrette. You can see the numbers here. Trung won with 56% of the vote here. Perrette in third place here with 19% of the vote, and all precincts reporting.
And I know that we talked about this a little bit earlier. Tyron Trung, would he be one of the youngest mayors of Bogalusa?
I believe you said he was
23 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So we can get our political analyst to comment on that a little bit later. But Congressman Steve Scalise also will return to Congress. The current House Minority Whip beat two opponents this evening.
Yeah, you can look at the numbers here. Steve Scalise has 74% of the vote here, followed by Katie Darling with 24%. There's still about 5% of precincts that need to report. However, this was able to be called very early with early voting.
All right, Paul Murphy live for us in Metairie. He is at the party for Steve Scalise. And Paul, obviously a big celebration there tonight.
Certainly is. We called this race shortly after the polls closed at 8. And take a look. Not a whole lot of people have left the Steve Scalise watch party so far. And he won this race handily from start to finish tonight, garnering about 75% of the vote in Louisiana's 1st congressional district. He spoke to his supporters a short time ago, promising to work hard to do things such as lowering inflation, to increase domestic energy production, restore the Louisiana coast, and to free up more federal dollars for police officers. He also told me that if the House flips from Democrat to Republican control, look for some possible investigations into Afghanistan and the U.S. Justice Department. Take a listen.
Part of the responsibility of Congress is to pass policy, which we're going to be very aggressive in doing. And the other side of that is the oversight function of Congress. In fact, there's an oversight committee, and every major committee has oversight subcommittees. So just finding out what's happening in the administration. We've been asking a lot of questions like how many people have crossed the border illegally? And look, again, passing policy that addresses things like inflation, energy costs, border security. Those are things we want to focus on.
And right now, Congressman Scalise is the #2 Republican in the House as the House Minority Whip. Now, if the House flips, he would certainly become the most powerful House leader from Louisiana since Hale Boggs 50 years ago. We're live at the Scalise headquarters, election night headquarters in Metairie at Drago Seafood. Paul Murphy, Eyewitness News.
All right, Paul, thank you so much. Congressman Troy Carter from New Orleans will also be returning to Washington.
Yeah, he beat Republican Dan Lux, and pretty much in an easy beat here, 73% coming in as the incumbent. Of course, we know that he got his position after Cedric Richmond, initially put in as a replacement for Cedric Richmond in 2021 as he left to become an advisor for President Biden. We have Mike McDaniel live for us at this party in the Mayor tonight. Mike.
Yeah, the key word there is party. This has certainly been a party here at the corner of Bourbon and Esplanade. The brass band just got off the stage. It's kind of dwindling now just a little bit, but it was in full swing earlier. Of course, going into this election, Congressman Troy Carter was the favorite to win it, and that's exactly what he did, just outright and very early on. So he will go on to have his full term as a U.S. representative, his first full term. Of course, you mentioned he is currently serving the seat vacated by Cedric Richmond to become the presidential advisor. Carter is, of course, when I talked to him earlier, he said whatever the outcome of this election was, it was important for Congress to do one thing, and that is to make plans because they work, not because they just fit into a political mold. He says affordable drug prices, especially for the older population, the infrastructure bill, and reducing or eliminating student loan debt are really big issues he will continue to advocate for. Carter had one Republican opponent you mentioned, Dan Lux, who is not a politician and was hoping that would set him apart from Carter, who of course has spent a lot of time in political office here in Louisiana. Carter was in the Louisiana House and Senate. He was a New Orleans City Council member and even made an unsuccessful bid for mayor. Carter says his experience puts him in a position to make change, and he thanked his supporters for getting him to this point. He says now it's time to get to work.
Because now the work begins. The healing across our country, the unifying across our country. Rather, the Democrats hold control when we wake up tomorrow or not. The task is still the same. That's right. Govern, lead, and take care of the people.
And again, it was an all-out party in here about 20 minutes ago. It kind of dying down just a little bit. Lots of supporters still here, and lots of supporters now going out, just happy to see Troy Carter headed back to Congress. Reporting live from the edge of the French Quarter, Mike McDaniel, Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. Well, voters in New Orleans today were also deciding on a change to city charter that would give council the power to approve mayoral appointees.
All right, taking a look at that right now, we have that amendment on our screen, and that's 61% saying yes, 39% with a no vote. It looks like we're going to turn things over to Clancy Dubose, our political analyst, who is standing by. Or wait, we're good. They want us to go to Eleanor Tabone first, and then we're going to go over to Clancy.
Clancy's going to call this quickly, Eleanor, before we head to you. We're going to call this for a yes vote, a passing vote. Okay, Eleanor, you are at Criminal District Court. What can you tell us tonight?
Devin and Charisse, we are here at the Criminal District Court. Now, there are 351 precincts in Orleans Parish. I have here with me live Darren Lombard, Orleans Parish Chief Elections Officer. Mr. Lombard, you told me yesterday 27% voted in early voting. Do we know how much voted today?
We're not showing that yet. The numbers are still coming in. It's actually not 27%. It was 27,000. We need to correct that one. But we're having the votes come in right now. We're currently at 173 of the precincts reporting, and we should have another update probably within a few minutes. So we're getting closer and closer to that number, that final number.
And Mr. Lombard, how has things gone throughout the evening, and what will happen into the evening as we continue to count?
Everything's gone smoothly for the most part. No major hiccups or anything like that. It's just that sometimes we have a little bit slower process. So we're getting there, and we'll have that done pretty soon.
What time do you think you'll be wrapping up, and what time do you think you'll be heading home tonight?
Well, I hoped. I hope to be done within another 30 to 45 minutes, and we'll see about that. We're waiting on a few things.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Scalise and Devon, now talking charter change. We have here Councilman Eugene Green. Councilman, for our viewers, can you explain what charter change means?
What we've basically done is determine if the vote goes as it is expected, that the City Council will have the final approval requirement relative to the appointments that the mayor might make relative to 14 directors. So we've changed the city charter by adding this provision.
Now, preliminary counts show 60% for the charter change. You were opposed that, you were against it. Why?
Well, I was simply against the charter change because I think that the charter was well written. It gives the council already the power to remove directors for any cause, basically. I felt that that was something that we could stand on, but I want to thank the voters of the city of New Orleans for coming out so far in the large numbers, making clear what your position was on this issue, and now it's up to me as a city council member to work with the mayor relative to the directors that she may put before us to make sure that we get directors who are going to go out there and address the concerns that our citizens have relative to crime, streets, and other items that are so important to our community.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. And once again, thank you all for being here, but thank you to our voters. It's important that we had the type of participation that we had today. Thank you.
Thank you. Reporting live, Scalise and Devon, Eleanor Tabone, Eyewitness News.
All right, I'm going to take it out. Eleanor, thank you so much. And, you know, throughout the night, I have had the pleasure of being with Eyewitness News political analyst Clancy Dubas and political pollster Ron Fauché. They're both joining me now. We are calling this charter change as passing.
Yeah,
61%.
we called it right before we threw to Eleanor, but we didn't get on it. We didn't get any airtime, but it was Devon relayed that info to Eleanor. You know, based upon not only the results that we know, but looking at what's out and looking at the trends in precincts, you know, looking at the different demographic profiles of various precincts, it's failing in some, but where it's passing by huge margins, and it's not getting crushed by huge margins in very many precincts. So I think it's going to pass. It may go slightly below 60%, maybe not, but you know, this is, Ron, you polled this early on, didn't you, I think?
Yeah, well, basically when you ask voters if they want to have more accountability or more oversight on something, they tend to generally be for it, even if the issue hadn't been developed. But I think what happened as the mayor's popularity has gone down, and has gone down significantly over the last year or so, I think it helped this thing quite a bit, and the final result will be interpreted in terms of that. Now,
as a referendum on
right,
Mayor
as a
Cantrell.
referendum on the mayor. Now, even though
the proponents did not want it to be a referendum on the mayor,
absolutely,
because frankly they wanted to just keep it issue oriented and
I know some of the opponents of it who aren't particularly thrilled with the mayor. Didn't think it was a good idea to do it relative to this mayor or other mayors. So there were a lot of cross currents, but it will be interpreted as a vote on the mayor, I think.
All right, lots of other big races tonight. One of the races that we mentioned off the top was, of course, the U.S. Senate race. Senator John Kennedy reelected. That is something that you all found very interesting, and his speech very interesting. Why is that? What does this mean for our gubernatorial election that's just right around the corner?
Well, I think one thing that's been really interesting in Kennedy's campaign in recent weeks, maybe I'm seeing things, but you always can look for clues in these elections. When Kennedy came out with his re-election campaign, it tended to be more stridently conservative. In fact, his ads even said John Kennedy, conservative for U.S. Senate. His most recent ads just had U.S. Senate on it. The big issue that he pushed at the end was drug prices for struggling middle-class people and poor people and that sort of thing. I thought his speech tonight was very conciliatory. It wasn't a hard partisan speech. And So you say, well, what does all that mean? What it means is he may be looking to run for governor. Because if you are going to run for governor, that would be a better positioning, particularly if you're running against Jeff Landry, who's already got the Republican endorsement, the executive committee endorsement, and Kennedy might be in a position not only to beat Landry for that vote, but to get the votes around Landry too.
That's right.
So,
in fact, Landry said early on he would not run if Kennedy was running, but Kennedy didn't say one way or the other. So Landry wanted to just jump out there, and I think Landry was trying to preclude Kennedy. And if Kennedy reads it like that somebody's trying to elbow him out of the race, that may actually nudge him toward running, you know, because politicians do lots of things for lots of reasons, and ego is always one of them. Now, I don't see John Kennedy as a guy who reacts emotionally to things. He's a very analytical guy, and he's very calculating, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I think he analyzes all of his major decisions very thoroughly. Whether you agree with where he's going or not, he analyzes and slices and dices all the outcomes and effects and currents of his decisions very thoroughly, and then he just makes a decision. And I think I agree with Ron. I don't think I agree. I definitely agree with Ron, but I think that he has thought this through, and I think he wants to keep his options open. He didn't declare that he's running for governor, but as he was talking, I looked at Ryan, I said, does this sound like a speech for governor? And he said, yeah. So, because it struck me that way. And when I say speech for governor, like he was setting the stage. He was saying the kinds of things you would say if you were fresh off of a big victory and getting ready to run again in a year for governor.
Right, it wasn't Washington speak.
That's right.
He was reading the list of all these Democrats and independents who ran against him for the Senate, and so
saying
it's
nice things about him, you know.
Yeah. And one of the things about the next governor's race is most people in politics think there's a big vacuum, a big void right now, and somebody or some candidates will fill it. Most people think the lineup won't stay the same. And of course,
part of the big void is who can beat Jeff Landry, because Landry's got his 30% locked in, but there's at least 50% out there or more who say, look, I'll take anybody but Landry. And if somebody like Kennedy runs, he could suck up all of that vote, and Landry would have a real tough time getting elected against John Kennedy.
Just talking about it has made this night even more interesting. So thank you, gentlemen, for your expert analysis and perspective. As always, it has certainly added so much to the conversation. We appreciate it. All right, and that's going to do it for us over at the analysis desk. Let's toss it over to Devin.
All right, thank you so much. There are still a number of big races that are still being counted across the nation tonight, and polls are actually still open in some states out west. Tomorrow on the Eyewitness Morning News, we'll have results from across the nation and what it could mean for Washington. Also, that state Senate race between Duplessis and Landry here. We're still waiting on those results. That is all coming up tomorrow on the Eyewitness Morning News, beginning at 4:30 a.m. and going till 9 a.m.
All right, and right now those results have Duplessis at 54% and Landry at 46%. Well, stay with us. Your local weather expert, Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin, will be in with a full look at your forecast. That's coming up after the break.
You need eyes on the storm.
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin is in Lafitte from our Mobile Forecast Center.
The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, has Southeast Louisiana covered. Get the latest weather data.
Real-time weather information. We can fill in the gaps where data may be missing.
Up-to-the-minute forecasts from your local weather experts.
We can drive it out and see exactly what's happening.
And live video from inside the storm. The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan. Only on Channel 4.
You can always get more on the Eyewitness News at 10.
Investigations that make a difference in our community. From journalists who know Southeast Louisiana inside and out.
Get more from your local news on the Eyewitness News at 10. We don't just break the news. We investigate corruption in action.
Sheriff Jack Strain shut down the Covington facility following a series of investigative reports by Eyewitness News.
We uncover the truth.
An investigation into a kickback scheme involving former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain has evolved into allegations of sexual abuse.
We follow the story wherever it leads.
Guilty on all counts.
We'll keep telling the story because you deserve to know.
I want all the science nerds out there to know I am with you. And I was able to make a career out of it and take a passion and turn it into a job.
Chasing down a rainbow.
Science and weather has always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. Rocks and minerals, I had a rock collection as a kid, and I love space. I was blessed enough to be able to do that in my hometown and at WWL-TV.
We don't just break the news. We make sure your voice is heard.
We want to know that the water we're paying for is safe to drink and is safe to bathe in.
We hold the powerful accountable. The question is, are the changes going to be made or not? We get results.
Residents in East St. Tammany Parish are getting a $23 million upgrade to their water system.
You can trust the eyewitness investigators. We'll keep telling the story.
Hi, Mr. Franklin. I just want to thank you. You were right on the tornado that was coming onshore in the Big Branch Marsh, and that storm eventually walloped me pretty good. If I had not been watching you and you had not been letting me know how close that storm was to me, I would not have been able to take shelter. I am grateful. So thank you again, Mr. Franklin. Bye.
You need eyes on the storm.
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin.
It is a warm and humid night with temperatures still in the low 70s at the airport. Now the humidity, while still high, is a little lower than it was yesterday. And the dew points will continue to fall overnight, but by wake-up time tomorrow morning, you will feel the difference. Falling into the 60s, still low 70s across the metro area. And as I said, dew points, while a little lower than yesterday, still on the muggy side, but that will change as we'll start to tap into some drier air. And it will be less humid by tomorrow through Thursday and Friday, with also afternoon temperatures more in the 70s, a little closer to normal. We're also still watching Tropical Storm Nicole, which is almost a hurricane, and the expectation is that it will become a hurricane before making landfall. However, this is not an August-September type hurricane. It's actually fairly disorganized. You see plenty of gaps in any kind of rain bands. Most of the circulation around the center doesn't have a whole lot of thunderstorm development around it, and actually the wind field is huge. So we're looking at, as this makes landfall and nears Florida, tropical storm force winds from South Carolina all the way down to almost Miami. It will be making landfall probably sometime late Wednesday, early Thursday, continuing across the state, may try and move into the Gulf very briefly before getting quickly moved up toward the north and then northeast. The reason for that, we got that deepening trough, which is going to pick up the storm and move it away. And it's this upper trough that's bringing us that more Arctic-like air mass. So we'll start returning to more fall-like temperatures a bit for tomorrow. And then by the weekend and really through all of next week, this Arctic chill settles into the region, and actually most of the nation will see temperatures going well below average. So mostly clear skies, mild and humid. Overnight temperatures probably dropping just another few degrees through the overnight. During the day tomorrow, it will be a little milder and a little less humid, and a high of around 76 degrees, which again is a little closer to normal. That will continue through Friday, Veterans Day, but the real chill settles in on Saturday, with the cold sticking with us through next week.
You need eyes on the storm.
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin is in Lafitte from our Mobile Forecast Center.
The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, has Southeast Louisiana covered. Get the latest weather data.
Real-time weather information. We can fill in the gaps where data may be missing.
Up-to-the-minute forecasts from your local weather experts.
We can drive it out and see exactly what's happening.
And live video from inside the storm. The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan. Only on Channel 4.
You can always get more on the Eyewitness News at 10.
Investigations that make a difference in our community. From journalists who know Southeast Louisiana inside and out.
Get more from your local news on the Eyewitness News at 10. We don't just break the news. We investigate corruption in action.
Sheriff Jack Strain shut down the Covington facility following a series of investigative reports by Eyewitness News.
We uncover the truth. An investigation into a kickback scheme involving former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain has evolved into allegations of sexual abuse. We follow the story wherever it leads.
Guilty on all counts.
We'll keep telling the story because you deserve to know.
I want all the science nerds out there to know I am with you. And I was able to make a career out of it and take a passion and turn it into a job.
Chasing down a rainbow.
Science and weather has always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. Rocks and minerals, I had a rock collection as a kid, and I love space. I was blessed enough to be able to do that in my hometown and at WWL-TV.
We don't just break the news. We make sure your voice is heard.
We want to know that the water we're paying for is safe to drink and is safe to bathe in.
We hold the powerful accountable. The question is, are the changes going to be made or not? We get results.
Residents in East St. Tammany Parish are getting a $23 million upgrade to their water system.
You can trust the eyewitness investigators. We'll keep telling the story.
Hi, Mr. Franklin. I just want to thank you. You were right on the tornado that was coming onshore in the Big Branch Marsh, and that storm eventually walloped me pretty good. If I had not been watching you and you had not been letting me know how close that storm was to me, I would not have been able to take shelter. I am grateful. So thank you again, Mr. Franklin. Bye.
When you need eyes on the storm,
Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin is in Lafitte from our Mobile Forecast Center.
the Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, has Southeast Louisiana covered. Get the latest weather data,
Real-time weather information. We can fill in the gaps where data may be missing.
up-to-the-minute forecasts from your local weather experts,
We can drive it out and see exactly what's happening.
and live video from inside the storm. The Mobile Forecast Center, sponsored by Nissan, only on Channel 4.
You can always get more on the Eyewitness News at 10.
Investigations that make a difference in our community. From journalists who know Southeast Louisiana inside and out.
Get more from your local news on the Eyewitness News at 10. We don't just break the news. We investigate corruption in action.
Sheriff Jack Strange shut down the Covington facility following a series of investigative reports by Eyewitness News.
We uncovered.
Branding with some breaking news in this newscast. We are now able to call that Senate District 5 race. Clancy Dubose, tell us why.
Royce Duplessis already has 52% with 85% of the vote in, and I'm told that the early vote from Orleans Parish, which is about to go online, he's up by 700 votes. That's too big of a lead. He's going to wind up with a 53 or 54% margin over Mandy Landry in a very hard-fought race. And he's got to run again a year from now, but the district will be even more favorable to him a year from now.
Because of redistricting. All right. Thank you
Yes.
for your expert analysis tonight, you and Ron.
Thank
Let's
you.
go back over to Devin and Charisse.
All right, Clancy, Ron, and Katie, thank you so much. That is all the news for now. Thank you for watching.
Of course, you can go on WWL-TV.com for the very latest and all the election results, and watch Eyewitness Morning News for the very latest.